This is an M1 Garand, the greatest battle implement ever devised. We're going to talk about what parameters you need to keep in mind when you're reloading ammo for your M1 Garand. Why would you want to reload for your M1 Garand? Well, during the last 100 years, which this was designed about 100 years ago, there's been huge advancements in the technology of gunpowder and ballistics and everything involving firearms. The ammo being sold today, for the most part, has more power in the 30-06 case than the old style does, and the burn characteristics, how fast the powder burns, is also very different, which can in fact damage your M1. They make special M1 grade ammo out there, but it is a little pricey. It's more expensive than regular 30-06 usually, which of course is also not cheap. So in order to shoot your M1 Garand on a budget, it's almost imperative that you reload that ammo. For those of you new to reloading, let's go over what exactly we're talking about when we are reloading a rifle cartridge. So first of all, you got your spare brass and you have to put in a bullet. So we're going to put a bullet up here. Underneath that, you have your brass case. So it's a little fat for a normal 30-06, but close enough. And at the bottom, there is a new primer you got to put in there. So let's start at this primer part. The common type of primer that goes into a 30-06 case is called a boxer style primer. There's basically just two, Bourdain and in Boxer. There's a large primer and a small primer made for rifle applications. The 30-06 uses large rifle primers. There are many different brands of primer and types of primers amongst those brands that you could utilize for your 30-06 rifle reloading purposes. I usually use either Federal right there, or I bought a bunch of this stuff from Bosnia, not personally, but it was imported from Bosnia and it works great and it was super cheap. So if you ever run across a really good deal on these Bosnian primers, pick them up. So far, I've not had a dud yet. When it comes to accuracy, the primers aren't really that big of a factor as long as you stick with the same primer. So all of these, I'm going to be using these Bosnian primers, and that should not be a factor from one primer to another because they're still the same lot and still the same manufacturer and model. But if you're randomly pulling out primers from a big smorgasbord bucket, then you might have an accuracy issue because that will affect the burn rate of the powder depending on how powerful that primer is. So if you got one round that's loaded with CCI Magnums and in the other round are these Federals, then you might have a problem there. So eliminate that factor and just use the same primer. Next up is the case. What do we have to do to prep that case to be reloaded, and how do we reload it in the first place? I personally am using this very simple single stage press, and it works wonders. I do highly recommend a single stage press when you're dealing with something that's a large 30-06 case and something that's specialty like the M1 Garand. Along with your single stage press, you're going to need dies that correspond with the caliber you're reloading, in this case 30-06. Now there are many brands out there that make fabulous versions of the 30-06 dies. You know, Dillon, Lee, RCBS, and others that I can't remember right off the top of my head. But I chose RCBS because not only are they inexpensive, but they inexpensively offer a small base die. Now, what is a small base die? When you fire a cartridge in your rifle, it will expand that brass out and fill the void, the slight void inside that chamber of your rifle. It will expand that out, now you can see my artwork here. It will expand that case out to fill the chamber, which is great. That's exactly what it's supposed to do. But when that happens, then it is conformed to that particular rifle's chamber. And I pick up 30-06 off the ground at the shooting range, as well as shoot this in 3 different firearms that I have chambered in 30-06, not just the M1 Garand. So I need a set of dies that not only squeezes this down to a normal standard size case, I need it to squeeze it down even further down to the bare minimum acceptable limits. So then it will operate in my new rifles, my old rifles, and the semi-automatic M1 Garand. It is very highly recommended that if you're going to be shooting something semi-automatic style, you're going to need a small base die. Keep in mind, if you're using a small base die, it will wear out your brass a little bit faster than normal because brass will work harden as an alloy. And as you work harden, as it expands and then you push it back together on a regular basis, it will eventually crack. You'll either get a crack at the neck, or it will be a crack down here at the very base where the web goes from a solid base of brass to the actual open case. Luckily, I always lose my brass before I've worn it out, so no harm, no foul. Lastly, about dies, big shout out to RCBS for having exemplary customer service. The third case that I resized had a stainless steel tumbling pin. That's how I cleaned my brass. I'll put a video up here that you can look at that if you've not seen that yet. And I broke the decapping pin in the resizing die, which basically all that does, that reforms the neck right here and then punches out the primer of the old case. And it got stuck. It ended up bending and then breaking, and they sent me a replacement. No charge, no questions asked. You cannot ask for better customer service. The next reloading choice you need to make is gunpowder. All the gunpowder that's going to go into this case that of course propels the bullet. For the M1 Garand, there are three very popular powders that reloaders utilize. The first is Hodgdon 4895. From my experience, that is probably one of the most popular powders that people use for the M1 Garand. Unfortunately, I have not seen it on the shelves in years. You can order online, but typically you can only get it in like 8-pound jugs. You really need to know if you love that powder or not before you spend that kind of money on an 8-pound jug. Another option is the IMR 4064. That is also very popular, and it's a little easier to find locally. But what I'm using is Hodgdon Varget powder. This is what a lot of competition shooters use because it is a slower burn rate powder than the other two. These are actually in order from fastest burn rate to slowest. And the 4895 is probably the closest to what the M1 Garand was designed for back in the 30s. One very important thing to keep in mind when you're talking about powder choice is the speed of that powder. Now, in a bolt gun, in a lever action, or what have you, not a big deal. If you're talking about a semi-automatic rifle, then the speed of that powder becomes very important. Too fast, and it can damage the action. Too slow, it can also damage the action. Here's a very famous chart on the speed of gunpowders that are pretty popular today. It is highly recommended to not go much slower than Varget powder and not much faster than 4895 for the M1 Garand. If you go too slow, it's going to burn all the way into the operating rod. When I'm talking about the op rod, what I'm talking about is this guy right here. This rod goes all the way forward up into the hole that's drilled in the barrel that lets the gas back and then pushes this rod back, which activates the action. If the powder is too fast, it will hammer that back very, very quickly and cause additional wear and tear, and you don't want that. If it's too slow, the gunpowder will go through there and then follow the operation rod back here and then hammer not only the action, but the op rod itself, and could bend it to where it does not work anymore. I have no idea if they are making new operation rods or not. The op rods I know can be repaired. There is a company out there that specializes in repairing these, which leads me to believe you cannot buy new ones. Once you have selected the powder you're going to use, you need to figure out at what level, how much powder are you going to fill that case with. That's actually the easy part, because Hodgdon powders have an online resource, an online data loading service or center, and they have specific loading information for the M1 service rifle. It is fantastic. They also have load data specifically for the M1A service rifles, which I will be utilizing for my 308 reloads at a later video, so stay tuned. Remember to subscribe. That is one thing that I will preach to every reloader out there, is utilize the online resources from the powder manufacturers. Utilize the online resources from the bullet manufacturers. Utilize the reloading manuals you can get online and in person from your local bookstore or Amazon. These resources are way better and more accurate than any kind of keyboard warrior you're going to find out in the wild. And now we're going to talk about the bullet. The M1 Garand has the same twist rate as pretty much every single 30-06 rifle I've ever seen. That's a 1 in 10 twist rate, which means it is perfectly happy shooting anywhere between 150 to 180 grain bullet. But remember, these are old rifles. Mine has an almost new barrel. But if you have an M1 Garand, it possibly has a very worn barrel that still is functional and still can be accurate depending on what bullet shape and size and weight you choose. For the most part, 308 bullets come in two primary shapes. One is a flat base bullet, and the other is a penis, is a boat tail bullet, where the end kind of narrows in. And of course, here's an example in real life, not just my crude drawings. If you're wanting to shoot a 150 to 155 grain bullet, then it's highly recommended to not use a boat tail bullet and use a flat base bullet because of the bearing surface. The bearing surface is the part of the bullet that is wide enough to contact the rifling in the barrel. Part of that 150 grain bullet is a boat tail, then that makes the bearing surface that much smaller. If you have a worn out barrel, that may not be enough bearing surface to really get a good spin, and it might slide down the barrel and give you horrific accuracy. If you're shooting a 150-ish grain bullet, go with a flat base. If you're shooting something heavier than that, you can go to a boat tail bullet. The accuracy difference between a flat base versus boat tail bullet is very, very small, out to about 200 yards. After 200 yards, you do start to see some benefits of that boat tail shape, but not before then. And in some cases, I've been told that the flat base is more accurate under 200 yards. The gold standard bullet, what all the big dogs usually shoot, is 168 grain Sierra Match King. They are hollow point and boat tail, and this is basically what I'm going to be shooting and reloading myself. Now, they're not Sierra Match Kings. I did find a water damaged container that has 168 grain Sierra Match King shaped bullets for very, very cheap. So I bought a bunch of those, and if something does go wrong, if they are really bad, then I at least have an excuse for poor shooting. If you have a rifle that does not shoot 168 grains well, then there's either something wrong with your reloading style or something wrong with your rifle, because I've never seen a 30-06 rifle that did not enjoy 168s. Once I got all this together, I reloaded 3 rounds and went down to the range to check the speed. I shot them over a chronograph to make sure that they were shooting at the speed that I expected, which is somewhere between 2,600 and 2,700 feet per second. Due to how valuable to me the M1 Garand is, I did not shoot it for testing. I shot this Weatherby here, which is the only modern rifle I have chambered in 30-06. And it shot well. Unfortunately, I had 2 errors because it was an overcast day. I had 2 errors trying to get the speed, but the last one did get me a speed reading of right over 2,600 feet per second, which is perfect. The next step is to reload 8 rounds, put them in an official M1 Garand clip, go down to the range and fire those bad boys off and get that sweet ping sound. And once that is verified, then we are off to the races, reloading for the M1 Garand like nobody's business. Well, guys, that's for me today. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give me a like and go subscribe. A lot more is on the way. If you have any comments, questions, show what it is, or experience reloading for your own M1 Garand or service rifle, leave that down in the comments down below. I try to answer as many of those as possible. And as always, you guys have a great day. See ya.